Well, howdy and welcome to our discussion today on the topic of what is research. What you see in front of you is an example of an article, and we're going to use it as well as another article to discuss the topic of what is research. Quite often I ask students what is research or what comes to mind when they think about research, and they'll say things like boring, hard, tedious. Others will say things like a lab or a lab coat or mice. And others will actually say things like Google and Bing and kind of the notion of the internet sources that you have available to do research. So the purpose of our discussion today is to have you start thinking about research, what I would consider from a different perspective. Um, I typically ask students, have you ever done research? And every hand in the room will go up. But what I would submit to you is that the research you've done and your thoughts about what is research is a little different than what you're going to be learning about in our class this semester. So let's take a look at this article. The name of it is Benefits of Training and Development for Individuals and Teams, Organizations, and Society. And in this article, you see the authors, their university affiliations. It did come from a psychology journal. So let me scroll down here and we'll talk a little bit about some information here. Um, the annual review of psychology, and a little bit later on we'll be talking about APA referencing, and in that discussion there's something about the DOI. So here's an example of a DOI. Again, this is considered a research article, but I think that the thing that's interesting about it and the reason that I actually chose to talk about it today is because it really depicts what your current thought about research is. And all we have to do is look at the first sentence of the abstract to see that it is probably exactly what you think research is. So let's read that. This article provides a review of training and development literature since the year 2000. And so what I have found through the years is that students, when I say, have you done research, they say yes, and they think of it as being in terms of I've collected sources and I've written a research paper. And so what I'm going to submit to you is that what you're going to learn in this class goes a little beyond just taking those outside sources and combining them into what you might think about as a term paper or a research paper. From our perspective, research is gaining new knowledge. So if you haven't already done so, you should probably take a look at the first chapter because you'll get a feel for that as we go, or as you start reading that chapter. Now, a couple things I'll point out as we go along. First is that you'll notice that there are headings here, and so that's going to be something that you'll get used to writing. So this first section is an introduction. The next thing I'll point out is a couple of things. One is in this introduction, you're starting to see some of these outside sources. So again, they have told you from the beginning, this is a review of literature. So they're taking these outside sources and putting them together for you. There is some data in here, so you can see this average effect size, and there's several sections through here that we'll look at that show some data has been collected, but again, they're just bringing it together. Something else I'll point out here is the term we. Kind of old school APA is that you use third person when you get to your research proposal. That's what I will suggest. So third person means that you don't say I, we, our. But I just wanted to point out the fact that in some research articles you do actually do see that first person utilized. All right, so let's flip through, and I may go through this a little quickly. But again, it's just taking outside sources and putting them together into this paper. And again, notice that here's some more in different headings and then subheadings under those. Let's keep going. One of the things I think is interesting about this article, and you probably have seen it a couple of times, next time we see it I'll point it out, is that over in the margins they are providing, and of course now there's not one, but they did provide some definitions of terms for you. So here's some summary points, and at the very end you'll see literature cited. Now notice that they don't say references, because there is a difference in the reference list and literature cited. So this would be probably more like a bibliography. A reference list, which is what you'll eventually be writing, implies that every source in that list you have documented or cited in your research. A bibliography is just those things that you actually considered, and so this is it says literature cited, so I'm thinking it might be just a bibliography. The other thing I'll point out right here is, and I'll scroll through this list, but you don't see any websites. So notice as we go through, you're seeing things about journal articles, textbooks. I think somewhere in here there's some proceedings from professional meetings. But notice that there's no www or HTML, // everything that you see is actually textbooks, proceedings. It looks like here's one website, but the vast majority of items that you see in here are related to books, journals, proceedings. So let's move to the next article, which is the one that I will submit to you is closer to what our definition of research actually is. The name of this article is "The Manager as Coach as a Driver of Organizational Development." And again, if you didn't know any better, you probably couldn't really just look at this and say, is this research, is it not? So we'll have to flip through it and kind of see some of the elements of research in terms of the research representing new information. Just like the last article, there is an abstract, and we'll start right here, because in this particular abstract, and you don't see this always, but in this particular abstract you do see some headings. But some of these headings do suggest to you that this is new information. So they start out with the purpose, but one of the things that you'll learn this semester is that research, and from our terminology, means that you have a research design, you have methodology, you have the research approach, you have findings. We'll talk about a results section a little bit later on, a discussion section a little bit later on. So this author starts out with an introduction, again, just like the previous one. Again, you'll see lots of items that are cited in his paper. He actually has the introduction, and then he has a what he calls a review of literature. I typically actually use those somewhat interchangeably. So you will be using outside sources, but again, it will only be a part of your total paper that you write for me. While I'm flipping through here, I'll let you know too that you do write a proposal for me, and the thought then is that you go and actually conduct the research in your internship, and then you will complete that research during the internship and write a paper for Dr. Gundy. So here's where we are getting into a little bit different the differences between the two articles, because then he starts talking about the fact that he's going to be doing a case study. So he's collecting new data from some managers in organizations. So again, we have some methodology. So he talks about the data source for this case study. So he looked for outside sources. He talks about the individuals that were in the study, how they were selected, what they had to do. They were required to post at least one main entry. And we keep moving. The next section that would tell you that it was in fact a research studies, he talks about data analysis. So anytime you collect data, there has to be something with the analysis of the data. So in this case, it's a case study, so his data was words. If you're doing quantitative research, your data would be numbers, so you would see the statistical analysis or something related to that. Next, we see another heading, results and discussion. So again, those are going to be your sort of main headings to tell you that you're looking at a research study. So introduction, review of literature, some mention of methodology, some mention of analysis, some mention of results and discussion. And so as we flip through here, you can see that this has all of the elements of a data collection project where he learned new information from these individuals. Again, he ends up with a conclusion, and then the last thing he's going to have is references. So again, these items should be specifically cited in his paper. While I'm here, I do want to make a quick note about this reference list. There are some differences here in how he is citing information and how we will. Again, later on you'll be doing a bibliography in APA, and I just want you to know that things like the items that are in quotations, this VOL would never be in APA, NO, the edition number, the PP, none of that would be in an APA citation. So hopefully, after looking at the two different articles in this lesson, you can see or get a little bit of a feel for the differences in research from maybe what your perspective was before you started watching this in terms of just writing a research paper from outside sources versus what we're talking about, research as gaining new information from data collection and data analysis.